My name is Chiu-Ki Chan. I'm an Android developer. I'm doing freelancing, and I've moved from California a year and a half ago. So all my clients are still in San Francisco. And so far, I have done testing. Actually, with my current client, it was the first time that I actually started doing testing. And I thought, hey, you know what? This is actually not as difficult as I thought it would be. So kind of since then, I've been trying to get the word out. It's like, don't be afraid to test. It's okay. You can do it. So this is not much of a talk. It is more like Google released this repository called Android Testing Blueprint, to show people the different ways you can test. And I thought it would be a nice thing to just see what's possible and possibly other people would be. So I'm going to be doing a walkthrough, meaning that I'll go through different directories and show you this is the file that makes the test happen, and this is how you right-click and make this test run. So if you have any questions or there's anything you think we should dive deeper, please tell me, because there's literally no agenda. I mean, there is one, but this is more like, this is the first folder I'm going to look at, and this is the second folder I'm going to look at. So this is not very structured. Let's just put it that way. And please do let me know if I'm not speaking loud enough or if you cannot see the things on screen, because I am fairly close to the screen. I can see it, and I'm fairly close to me, so I can hear myself. So I want to make sure that you're not just sitting there as like, oh, I wish I can actually hear what she's saying. So please do tell me. I want to make sure that you are getting what you want out of this. Okay? So right now what I'm projecting is just the GitHub repository. This is where everything starts. If you're interested in doing this at home afterwards to get deeper, you can go to the Google Samples repository and go to the Android testing templates. I think right now there's only this one thing inside. And they have a pretty detailed README as well to show you how they structured the app, how do you run things, if you want to run the command line, if you want to do it in Android Studio, and etc., etc. So this is pretty much a live version of the README file. So let's just dive right in. Android Studio. I tried to bump up the font size. Is that readable? Okay, cool. As usual, when we first look at the Android app, we usually start with the main activity. In this case, it's called Hello Testing Blueprint Activity. So I just realized that I should have brought up my emulator because it should take a while. So you can go ahead and stare at the screen while I bring up my lovely emulator. I call it the emulator, but it is Genymotion. But it still takes a while, right? Like it's not instantaneous. I still have to click on stuff and things. And then when it boots up, it usually saves things. So anyway, so let's just walk through the code a little bit, and then we'll run it just to see what it does. Okay, just pop up in my face and insist on being in the middle of the screen. Go on the side. Okay, right. So we have an activity that you can see here on onCreate. It grabs a view in the XML file and assign it to this Android testing rocks text view. And then it has two different, I guess, helper classes. One is called MyPlaneJava class. The other one is Android library module class. The way it's set up like that is because they want to demonstrate how do you do kind of like a pure Java testing and how do you test in Android library. And then there's a button on the screen which we'll see shortly. All it does is if you click on the button and both helpers return is ready, then it will switch the text view to say rocks. So let's see if the emulator is boot up. Yes, it is. So we are going to click that lovely green button. So how much Android does everybody have? So I think navigating Android Studio is fine. I don't need to go too narrative on that. All right, so let's get that going. And we will be very patient.
Do you have like a preference over this emulator than like the native emulator in Android Studio?
This is faster. It's just run differently. So this is actually run as a VirtualBox emulator. There are pros and cons. Kind of the pro of this is faster, but then the cons is like they only provide certain images, kind of the most popular devices. So if you have certain requirements of like certain device sizes and densities and versions, then you will probably need to use the one that's provided out of the box from Android Studio. Good question. So yeah, this is usually I usually use Genymotion as my emulator.
It's only for personal.
This is my personal device. I do actually have a business license for my Linux box at home, which I did not bring because it's a little bit hard to log along.
I use Genymotion too, so it's okay.
It's okay. Right, free for personal use, so you should use it. So this is how the app looks like. Like I said, there's a button, and if you click on it, then it says rocks. So it doesn't do much. But like I said, it's to set up so that it shows you how to test various parts of the app. But if you notice that the title of the app says Flavor 1, so it also actually demonstrates flavors. How many of you have used flavors in your Android apps? Okay, so some of you already have experience with that, but let me just show you how that is set up. So if you look at the build.gradle file, which is going to be tricky because it's so packed. All right, so this is the build.gradle file for the app. And here you can see that we have two product flavors, Flavor 1 and Flavor 2. So for those of you who have not done it before, it's essentially different flavors or variants of your app that you can configure depending on, well, how you want it to be different. So a lot of the times, typically this is used, for example, if you make an app and you want to publish it on both the Google Play Store and the Amazon Store, and then they have different ways of doing things. For example, if you want to have a button that says, please rate me on the store is different, so you want to send people at different places. But the rest of the app is going to behave exactly the same. So you can have two flavors and vary the behavior. So in this example, there are a few things that is different in the different flavors. So here, the application ID is different, which is not very visible, but they also change the title for Flavor 2. So for Flavor 1, the title of the app comes from the just the main folder. So we can go through here. In the main folder, in the values, and we have strings. So, oh, actually, I was wrong. So in the main folder, the app name is Android Testing Blueprint, which is not what we saw, right? What we saw was Android Testing Blueprint Flavor 1. And if you go to Flavor 1, then in the rest folder, there is a strings. And this is where that string comes from. So it got pulled in because I am building, if you click on this Build Variant tab here, what? Ginormous! Oh my god, but this is not what I want it to be. Yeah, sorry. This is what happens when you try to make sure that people can read the words when you present. So, as you can see very clearly, we have chosen Flavor 1 debug, which is why this string is picked. So now, let's try to choose Flavor 2 and see what happens. What do you think will happen when I deploy the app? We will have to be zen and wait. That's what happened. Ah, did you see? So the title says Flavor 2 now. And the way that works is that in the Flavor 2 directory, okay, this guy can go away now. In the Flavor 2 directory, we also have a res value strings. And then if you open that up, then you can see that it says Flavor 2. So they had it set up this way because they also want to show you if you want to do flavor-specific testing, there are ways to do that. So far, this is just the app. Yeah, question.
I just want to comment. I actually really love the flavor stuff. And the way I use it is I have a debug flavor, and then I have a release flavor. And you can install both of them on the same device. So as I'm developing, I always have a release flavor on the device, so that if I'm troubleshooting something, I can do a compare on the same device, running both of them at the same time.
So when you say debug flavor versus release flavor, that's different from the debug build type and the release build type.
The build type it's confusing the way I named my flavors, but basically when I do a debug flavor, it appends debug to the package ID so that you can run both of the versions on the same device versus one overriding the other.
So I guess my question is, when you build your debug flavor, is it like, do you change it in the build type debug? Like you basically put a different application ID in here.
Yeah, actually, technically I call it QA flavor.
That's why, because I don't want people to go back and they try to, like, my ginormous little thing, it does say debug.
Yeah.
I don't want them to,
QA debug,
So basically, it's called QA flavor because you also call it debug. Then you will have basically it's a cross. So for each build type, for each product flavor is one variant. So that's why here, even though I only have flavor 1 and flavor 2, I can have 4 choices, right? I can have build flavor 1 debug, flavor 1 release, and then flavor 2 debug, flavor 2 release.
So the release, does that mean Google Play Market release, or what does release mean?
So the release means that you're assigning it with a release key rather than your debug key. So to push anything to the Google Play Store, you have to assign it with a proper key rather than the default key that comes with Android Studio. That's what that means.
It's also usually when you run things like program out code.
Right. So the default Gradle file you can see here. Okay, thank you, giant font. You can see here that minified enabled Chiu for your release build type. So that's what runs program. It strips out classes that you don't use and obfuscate things. So that makes it a little bit more difficult for people to put into your app and see what you're doing. Cool. So now let's actually do some testing stuff. So if we go back to the main activity, we can see there are 2 things. That's the plain Java class and then the Android library module class. So we can look at how each of them are tested. If we go to the module that contains this class, which is here, is inside the module plain Java. And you see there are 2 folders. One is the main folder and one is the test folder. If you go to the test folder, you can see that there's a test, which, how many of you have done JUnit tests before? Okay, cool, so I don't have to go too deep here. So this is JUnit test, and the way that this is triggered is that it has a annotation that says test. This is how JUnit 4 knows that this function is a testing function. And this other function has the word before on it, which means that run this before all the other tests. And right now, the before one, all it does is just get a new instance so that you can test it. And what this says is that assert that when the function is ready, it's called, it returns true. And to run this, what we will do is we will right-click on here, and then you can either, so it's a little bit confusing, you can either create a target, which means that next time you run it, you can do it from the drop-down, or you can just run it. Kind of, the difference is very minor. So I said run, and I am going to make sure that so that now you see how the bottom pane changed, and then pop up something that says my plain Java task or test passed. So this is what happens when you want to test your pure Java well, library. Does that make sense? So let's go back to the app and see how this dependency is set up. So here, this is the app, and the app depends on this module, right? Which is what we were testing before. So in this example, the test is in the module itself. It makes sense, right? Because the functionality is provided by your module. You can do the same thing in your app as well. You can also do plain Java JUnit testing inside your app. And I don't know if are people interested in seeing a test fail? It's kind of boring, but so just want to make sure that I'm actually running this thing, so I change it now. Even though the isReady function returns true, I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to see if it returns false. So again, I click the green button on top that runs this target, and then now it's like, no, the test failed, and then the assertion error is here. So this toy example is kind of boring because this function doesn't really do much, but the whole point is like to have an example to see how you can set up your code to have Java modules versus Android module. Questions? Okay, so let's do something slightly more interesting. So this is running, so remember I clicked on this green arrow to run this test. There's also this other thing you can click. So this is the debug one if you want to run it with the debugger. It's not what I'm showing you. What I'm showing you is this one, which is run this with coverage. It's the exact same thing, except it gives you code coverage, meaning that how many lines of your app is exercised by your test so that you can know how much testing you're actually doing. In our example, this pop up on the side, it's 100% because our library is really small. All our library does is it has this one single function called isReady, and we did test it. In real life, when you first start testing, usually this number is not that beautiful. But this is a kind of a good way to give you a sense of how much testing you're doing, where are you missing out, and it also shows you branching as well. So in this particular case, it's always return true, but sometimes you may write a test that only tests the happy path, right? It's like, oh, you know, if the returned value is not null, then it's all good, but then maybe you never actually test when it's null. And then you can see from the code coverage report, they say, oh, actually, I have not verified that when I give it a null input, what will happen. So this is a good tool to make sure that you get that covered. Cool? All right, so let's try the other part. So we have gone through the MyPlayingJava class. So let's go to this one, which is, again, it looks exactly the same as the other module, right? It also has an isReady function. But the difference is that it lives in a library that is an Android library. And the reason, like, how can you tell that it's a different library is if you open up the build.gradle file in that module, you can see that it uses the Android library plugin. And if we also open up, oh, there's actually no test in this library. Okay, I guess my notes were wrong. There's Android test. Ah, okay, thank you. So for some reason I was looking for test, and then I couldn't find it. So that's the difference. So when you're running an Android test versus test, the difference is that when it's just test, then it's pure Java testing. And the reason why it's different is that when you run the Android test, it actually gives you access to Android classes. So for example, here, you can ask the instrumentation registry for the context. And then you can use the context to do things. In our case, our library doesn't actually take in the context, so it's a little bit of moot. Like, why do I even need to bother taking a context? But for example, in this case, Google added a function to say that, well, let's just see that I can retrieve strings and it will return what I expect it to return. And the other difference between this and what we saw earlier, the pure Java one, is that you have to run this test with an emulator running. You cannot just run it on the JVM. So let's run this question.
Yeah, where? So where? Okay, I was curious where you got your context from. I see it.
Here, in the context comes from the instrumentation registry. Cool. So same deal. We will right-click on it, and then we will be confused because we cannot run. So remember earlier when we did the other test, we have a run target, and now it's not here anymore. The reason, oh, I'm so sorry, this is so big. The reason, if you can see, is that the unit test target is chosen. And the way it's currently set up, you cannot have both. You cannot run both the JUnit test and the Android test at once. You have to switch. So once we switch to Android instrumentation test, then I will close this thing. Then it's kind of subtle, but you can see actually here that the Java folder turns green. That means now Android Studio is aware that this is actually a testing folder. And now, if we right-click, then we can see the run target. So this is one thing that when I first started was really confusing. So why is it not working? That's because if you do both kind of testing, you have to switch back and forth, which is a pain. But I think it's a limitation of how the compiler works, you have to choose. So as promised, unlike the JUnit test, when you ask it to run, it just runs. This time it actually asked me to choose a device because it has to be run on a device so that you can have a context. So I said, sure, we'll run this on all future launches. I can bring up the emulator, but there's nothing to see because there's actually no UI involved. We'll go through the Espresso testing later. We can actually see things happening. And just to drive the point, the point home, I'm going to close up the app, so nothing happens on the emulator. There's nothing to see. But we see the same thing here. So the presentation of the result looks exactly the same. It's on the side panel, just like the JUnit testing, except that you have to run it on a device, and you can exercise things that are specific to Android. Cool. All right. So this is going to get a little bit interesting because there will be a lot of typing involved. Here, we can see that the test is annotated with medium test. Has anybody used the annotation like that before? One person, two people. Small test, same difference. So in Android, there's actually a way that you can annotate your test. This is just the one that comes default. You can also define your own annotation so that you can run specific subset of tests. So for example, this is tagged as medium. So to do that, right now, the only way I know how to do it is actually to run it on the command line. So we're going to type. Right, can we see this? So, for example, if we want to run just the medium test, we can do this. So connected Android test will run everything that is under instrumentation test. So, but for us, let's just run the flavor one debug Android test. So it's the same thing that we showed earlier in the drop-down, right? It's a flavor one debug. So that's called a variant. So if you specify the variant name, then we'll just run that one variant. And then what we're going to do is give it a parameter, which is Android.test instrumentation runner arguments dot size equals medium. Good, thank you. I am pretty sure this will not work because when I type things instead of copy and paste, it never works. But at least we have people helping me to make sure I type the right thing. So again, this is going to run on the emulator, but there's not much to see on the emulator. I mean, I can show you the emulator, I guess. Yeah, this is very boring. Let's look at the shell to actually watch it does its thing. So build successful. Okay, what happened? So the tricky part is like when you run things on the command line like that, it actually doesn't show you the result. On the command line, it will cry. Let me just put it that way. If it fails, it will cry and say something ran wrong, but if it's successful, it will not actually show you anything. So what we will do is we will go to the browser, and it's going to be very small. We will navigate to the directory. Oh, actually, I don't have to make it so small. Whoa! So now it's bigger. Except it doesn't stay big. So I'm in the repository. If I go to app, build, reports, Android test, if it only will stay big, flavors, flavor one, index, then it will show me my report that says, hey, I ran 2 tests and they all passed, yay. And then you can dig a little bit deeper and see what was run. And then if it failed, it will show you the failures. So it's a little bit clumsier this way, but then you can run a subset. And depending on your preference, right, you may actually want to put this report on some website somewhere so that other people can look at it if you're running on a continuous fashion. But just to show you that it actually just run medium, let's go back to Android Studio and not give it the parameter, which means just run everything. Yeah, okay. So then we'll go back to that folder, and then we can see the report, and we'll say something different, hopefully. Things always take a long time. This is the point where people tell knock-knock jokes or laugh nervously. Either way is fine. We're 98%, but 98% is always the longest time. I don't know why. Okay, done. So now we've done that. We can go back to the browser and we can refresh. Oh, come on. Yeah, okay, good. I was worried that it would not be, it will be exactly the same. Do you remember it said 2 tests before, right? So now it says 5 tests. So when we run it with just medium, so just the 2 medium tests will run, and then now it's everything's run. So I usually run things through Android Studio instead of the command line because then everything's integrated and I can click on it if something goes wrong. But this is an alternative, and then it's slightly more powerful. I'm pretty sure that you can pass this perimeter if you do the drop down in the Android Studio and put it in the right place. I just haven't done it yet, but at least you know how to do it on the command line.
Yeah, probably through like a run configuration.
Right, so let me just go there very quickly too so that people know what I'm talking about. So if in the run configuration, I can actually say edit configurations, and there is a thing called extra options. So probably if you put in some magic string here, magic will happen. But I'm not quite sure whether you need to do that -p or not -p and whatnot. So exercise for the reader. Go home and figure it out at some point. But yeah, usually I don't do these things on Android Studio. You can. Cool. All right. So another thing that is interesting in this repository is they also have a module that's test only. So right now we have seen the app module and then 2 library modules, but there's also this one which is flavor 1 test only. If we go to here, it says Android test only module test. So essentially this is a module that does nothing except to run test. And there may be different reasons why you want to do this. I couldn't come up with a good one. So all I want to show you is like how do you set this up. So if you want something that is a test-only module, this is kind of the secret. So this module, if it's just standing alone, it doesn't know what is it linked to. But if you ask for it to do a target project path app, then it knows that, okay, I'm going to be linked to the app so that I can test it. And then it also need to specify what variant you want to test against. So in this case, it's flavor 1 debug. So this is kind of an FYI thing. Like for me, at least, maybe you already know how you're going to use it. For me, just like, okay, one of these days I may want to do a test-only module, and this is how I set it up. Okay, so now we're actually going to go back to the app and go through things that which I think is like the interesting part because the emulator is actually going to move without me touching it. So if we go back here, and if we look at the Android test folder, there are 2 things here. One is integration, and then one is UI. And inside UIs, there's Espresso and UI emulator. So that's kind of like the 3 flavors of on-device testing that you'll be doing. Integration testing, what it means is that you are running it on a device, but you're not testing the UI. So you are still going to be accessing the context, but not touching buttons or anything like that. So it's a little bit similar to what we saw earlier in the Android library test. So here, I mean, it's like super similar, right? So first we say initiate target, and then it was testing the string verification, and then it also verifies that I can guess things from the library. So I'm not actually going to run this one. Oh, sorry, question.
Is there a reason you choose this over using a standard JUnit test?
So the question was, why would I do this instead of using standard JUnit? The reason is if you need to get access to Android-specific things. So for example, here we are testing something that is hooked onto the context, and the JVM doesn't know anything about context. So when you don't need to, don't, because it will pretty much by definition be slower because it has to like upload things to the emulator and run it there.
Essentially, if you need the context, you're using this one.
Exactly. If you need the context, then you do it.
Now, your folder names, integration, then UI with Espresso, uiautomator, those arbitrary or are those name specific?
The folder names at that level is arbitrary, but it has to hook off Android test. So the first level has to be Android test, Java.
Okay.
And then the rest you can just put it wherever.
Does that need to be your package name at the 3rd level, or is that one also arbitrary? Sorry.
I have not done it. That is not my package name, but I'm pretty sure it's fine.
Okay.
Exercise for the reader. But make sure that you put it in Android test. Otherwise, Android Studio and Gradle wouldn't know that this is a test Java file. Question?
Is there a reason to ever use just pure Java tests? Because couldn't you do pure Java tests with regular Android tests and just not use the context?
So the question was, why would I ever use pure Java test? Because it's a subset of the Android test, right, essentially. Speed. If you can run it on the JVM, you don't have to launch the emulator, you don't have to upload an APK to the emulator, wait for the emulator to run, and then fetch the results back and display it. It is much, much faster if you can do JVM, pure JVM test. In fact, it was to the point that, have anyone heard of Roboelectric? So Roboelectric is an effort to try to run Android stuff on JVM because it's that much faster. Except then, well, you kind of have to write your own context and your own button and your own, and to kind of get out of hand pretty quickly because essentially you're trying to write shadow classes for a lot of different Android things. There are value in writing that. For example, if you want to if you want to test things that are related to a bundle, which is an Android-specific class, but a bundle, if you think about it, is just a key value pair. So there is nothing really Android-specific. So using Roboelectric for that would make sense. Is I want to, for example, maybe I have a helper class that takes in a bundle and extracts some values and then spit out a URL or whatever, right? That sounds like it would be perfect to be run with Roboelectric so they can plug out values and then construct a string and then verify that string. So that would be why you will bother using pure Java test.
Are we talking like minutes of difference?
We are talking minutes, yeah. If you run on JVM, usually it's like, 2 seconds. And then if you run it on the emulator, it's like, okay, I'll go get a coffee. So, yeah. Well, you'll see. I mean, literally, right, when I was running the test, well, I'm not going to show you that right now. But yeah, you can tell the difference. Like, I'm like staring at the emulator, it's like, can you do something, please? Versus when you do the JVM, it's like, oh, okay, it's done. Cool, so this is integration testing. But let's get to the interesting part, which is Espresso, which is the part that I really like. The reason why I like Espresso is because it essentially pretends to be a human. It tries to click buttons, and so you can actually go through a lot of UI flow that way without you going through it. So that's the plus part. The minus part is that it's much slower than running pure JVM. So Espresso has kind of its own language, so let's go through that a little bit. So this is the Espresso test, and again, it's using the JUnit 4 syntax. So we have a test function that what it does is says on view with ID, meaning that you're telling Espresso, walk through the view hierarchy and find a view that has the ID, and the ID is button hello testing. So once you found that, then you perform this action called click. In Espresso, there's a whole host of different view matches. So view ID is one type of view matcher. You can also have things like with tags, with other things. And then there's a whole host of actions you can do. You can click on things, you can swipe on things, you can type, etc. So once you click, then the next thing say on view with ID. So I find this view, which is the text view, and then I will check that it has the text rocks. So this is the syntax, but the powerful part of Espresso is that it's built in so that it knows to wait for your UI to be ready before it verifies. So I don't know how many of you have actually done UI testing before Espresso. I have. In the old days, the bad thing is that you will try to verify that this text view has a certain text, and it will say, no, it doesn't. And the reason is not because it doesn't, it's because you're too fast. Like maybe it took 300 milliseconds for the text to be rendered, and you are looking 50 milliseconds in already, and then you're like, why is it, like, I can see it, why is it not there? And that's because of that synchronization problem. So Espresso has some built-in idling watches, essentially, so it watches the main UI thread and make sure there's no events queued on it, so that the rendering is done, and now I can go look at buttons, or I can click on buttons, because before I'd be like, let's click this button, like, it ain't no button there, like, what do I click? So Espresso also has built in so that it will watch the async task queue. So if you have run some background like task and the async task, it will be waiting until it's done before it verifies things. So that's what's nice about it. Question?
So I think it's just looking for any generic view. So we do automated testing with Calabash, and the problem we've had is that like Calabash, RubyGem has to explicitly define a view in order for you to be able to find it. So if we create like a custom text view that inherits from text view, Calabash can't find it. Does Espresso find custom views as long as they're a child of the class?
Yeah, so yeah, the question is like, for example, for the with ID thing, like, does it work with custom view essentially? And the answer is yes. So it literally just, on view is any view. Any view. Anything that derived from the view class. So in this case, it's looking at like the get ID function. So as long as the ID is defined, which is defined for all the views, it will work. Yeah. So let's see it running. So this time I'm actually going to try to have both things visible. Let's see if that works. Aha. Okay. So same trick. You right click on the name of the test and then you ask it to run. And we're going to run on the emulator. So watch carefully. This will actually launch the app and click on buttons. And do you see? It was so fast. All right, let's do that again. I don't know. I'm just very excited about things happening without me touching. Ta-da! Right, so like that, yeah, that's the excitement of the night. So you can see it work. And you can also see the results here. The format is very similar to the JUnit testing. It's on the side and it says, test results, green, okay, cool. So one other thing that was very quick, but is that we are running it with build variant 2. So, and all the tests are, if you're running it from Android Studio, you can change it so that you're like, oh, let's test this for build variant 1. So now let's see, it will say flavor 1 if you are fast enough to see it. You see? So, so that's kind of a quick Espresso talk. Hopefully that was good enough because we are actually going to move on from Espresso now. This is just one of the tools that you can use for testing. So we are going to actually look at uiautomator. Has anyone used that? Oh, question first.
Real fast, I was wondering how it knew to get the text to check if it was bots or not.
How it knows?
That second test, if you scroll down just a little bit, those check matches with text.
Uh-huh.
If that wasn't, like, say that wasn't a text view, that was, you know, a linear layout.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
How does it know?
So the question is that, so this with text happened to be on a view that is a text view that has the function get text. What happens if we get a view that is not a text view? Well, let's do that. So I actually know what's going to happen, but I'm going to. So what is going to happen is that it's going to say that the view type is mismatched. So, but let's just see it. So set content view here. If I go here, come on, let me go here. It's not letting me go there. Okay, fine. I will navigate there myself. So if I go back to the activity.
If you hit shift really quickly, you can actually just type in the name of the file and look at it right away.
Ooh, shift.
Yeah.
Okay, I will do that next time. So here, we are at the layout file. So I'm going to, like you said, try to do something with the linear layout. Okay, I don't know why the indentation is unhappy, but let's not worry about that. So I'm going to call it a container, right? So that we can go back to the test, Espresso test. And instead of looking for this guy, we will look for container. Let's see what happens.
For like, would it just have specific things that you can do depending on what type of?
Yeah, I'm going to show you the source file. So you see it's red. It's not happy. Let's see why it's not happy. Okay, need to like make it visible. So it says expected text with text, and then it says got linear layout. So essentially, it's a little bit hard to find on this view. So basically, it will find the view, and then we'll try to run the with text I think it's called view assertion. And then it will actually prematurely fail because,
There it is, on pause.
what?
Fourth row.
Caused by assertion error. With text, its blocks doesn't match the active view. Thank you, I knew it's somewhere there. So if it's a text view, but it doesn't have the text that you're looking for, it will fail in a different way. Right? Here it was like, I'm trying to find a view that I can look for the text, but it doesn't even have the text. Let me see if I can click through and actually show you the implementation of this guy. No, not like that. This click. So with text, bounded matcher. So that's the, so bounded matcher is a handpress matcher, which a lot of Espresso matcher is built on top of. And what it does is that if the constructor has a place generic, which I give it a text view already. So I don't think I will be able to walk you through too much, but essentially in the bounded matcher, because it knows what type is expecting, before even you get to the matches safely function, it will fail and just say, well, I need a text view. You said you are going to give me a text view. You're not giving me a text view. I hate you. And then we just like, huh?
So it has to be a text view, like you guys have a method get text or something.
Well, so here in get text, so in text view actually has a lot of children. Like edit text is a kind of text view. Autocomplete text view is a kind of text view. So anything that's a child of text view, bounded matcher will be happy. So it's not specifically has to be a text view. It just has to be a kind of text view, including text view itself. So this is kind of getting into advanced Espresso when you're defining your own matches and things like that, but give you a little flavor of what happens behind the scene. Yay, I love questions. More questions.
If you make a custom view that doesn't have like a standard input, like it's like a rotate control or something, can you write your own matcher for that?
Yes. If you have a custom view and you still want to test, so let's imagine, I'm not actually going to type it out. Let's imagine that instead of with text, you are going to type something that is like with degree, because like you said, maybe we have a, let's say we have a pizza widget, and you want to know how much pizza was eaten, right? And you have a function that says, you know, degrees eaten or something. So you can write a custom matcher that returns the type will be pizza instead of text view, and then matches safely. It will be so you here it's not that interesting because it passed in a matcher, which is a handpress matcher, so it's a little bit more complicated. So imagine that your function will actually take in an integer that is the percentage of pizza that was eaten. And then in the constructor, it will stash it away so that later in the match safely function, it can call, you see how match safely got a text view as a parameter? So in our case, we'll get a pizza. So then we can do like, you know, pizza dot percentage eaten equal the percentage that was passed in the constructor. So that's how you'll go about doing that. So you will have to, in your custom view class, expose some functions that you can verify, because like Espresso can't look at your pizza and tell you, like if all your pizza is draw, like pixels on screen, then it's much harder to verify. But since it's your class, right, you can define all kinds of getters. But that's a very good question. Cool. All right, so UI automator. I thought I asked that already. Have anyone used UI automator? Okay, so UI automator is kind of different from Espresso in the sense that it still can click on things, but it operates outside of your app. So Espresso, you have to have the source code of the app. It's kind of gray box testing, because it needs to know the ID of things, right? UI automator actually depends on the accessibility functionality of Android. So it can go around and like click on the home button and go to some other apps and open other apps and verify things that you don't have the source code for. Which sometimes you may want to do that because you may have integration points that you want to make sure that if I click on it, it will open some other thing that's outside of your control. I have not used this much, to be honest, because the way I usually run my Espresso test is if there are interfaces out, I will kind of block it at the intent level. So it will send an intent out, and I will not let it go out, and I will just check the intent and make sure that it's sending out the correct intent. Just because I feel like this is mine and that's theirs. So I don't want to bother testing other people's stuff, but you may have different requirements. So if you are at a point where, okay, I need to test outside of my app, then you will need to kind of step it up to UI automator. The syntax is very different in uiautomator. So let's take a look. Yeah, so this is the top of the file. So in Espresso, I think I skipped over that. In Espresso, the way you launch an activity is you define an activity rule. So you give Espresso, say, hey, this is an activity I want you to look at. And because it's gray box testing, it knows what class it is, so it can actually launch that. In uiautomator, you don't have that. So you most of the time we'll do it from the home screen, which is kind of this boilerplate that you have to grab a device, and then you press home, and then we will try to get the package name. So this is a little bit involved. So this is a private function that essentially is querying the package manager with the package name that is the category home. And the reason why it's going through all that is because you may have installed a custom launcher, so we cannot hard code the package name of the launcher. So it's like, oh, who can handle a package, like a category home thing? And then it try to find that. So you see how like already how involved this is, right? Because you are essentially an outsider trying to get hooks into the device. So once you find the once you have found the package for the launcher, then you can ask it to actually launch the wait for the launcher to launch, meaning that the home screen is there. Like you press the home button and you wait for the home screen to render essentially. And now that's done, then you can go through the same exercise and try to launch your own package. So this is kind of just the idiosyncrasy of how do you launch something. And then this is all done in the before function, meaning every time I run my test, I have to like find the home, click on it, and then click on my own app. So by the time you get to a test function, for example, here, you are already in the app. Then what do you do is that here is actually the content description. So this is an accessibility specific thing. So we have a button which it has the text written on it, but it also has and anyway, in the way this app was written, it also has a description for the screen reader to tell the blind person, for example, what this does. So we'll go look for this object using the description and then click on it. And then we will go and find the text view using the res ID and wait for it to be available and check that it's not null, and then check that the text is what we're expecting. So let's see this in action. This is very boring of me just dictating and figuring out what it does. So let's do the run. Actually, hold on. Let me just make it slightly more interesting by not starting at home. So we'll just randomly launch some other thing, settings. And we will run this, and then we'll watch what it does. It went home, and then it should launch our app, and then it click. So that's we're kind of doing this exact same thing, except we are using uiautomator. So for the first time I saw uiautomator, my question was, so if I don't have the source code, how do I know that the text view res ID is text view rocks? I mean, that's kind of not obvious. And the way to find that out is to use uiautomator viewer. Now this is kind of the, like I said, this is all depending on the accessibility package. So this is your spy into other people's apps. So let's try to run that. So I'm going to open up our app here, just so that when I open that up, it will be at the right place. So I am going to launch this. So this hangs out in the SDK folder on the tools. And it looks like that, which if you click on this button, it will, and I apologize in advance, I don't know how the font size is going to look. So it will grab whatever your device is displaying, which is the our app. And yeah, this is going to be super small, so hopefully. So what we are trying to do in the test was click on this button, right? And you can see this button here. Okay, let's look at it. So, for example, this content disk, this is the accessibility description that we were using in the app so that we can find this button to click on. And then the other text view, unfortunately, right now is not visible, so I cannot find the ID. So then we have to repeat the exercise. We have to go back to the app. Yeah?
Is this information only available in debug APKs?
I don't think so, because accessibility works even if you download things from the store. So like literally, this is what the screen reader uses for people who don't navigate the device by sight. Like it has all this accessibility tagging on it. And the uiautomator was like, well, if the screen reader can do that, I can do that too. So I am pretty sure that it will work for non-debug builds as well. So this is kind of a weird exercise because we are looking at things that we already have source code for, so why bother? But this is what Google did.
It comes in handy though, because the product we make, all of the content is dynamically generated, and it changes.
Oh.
So I don't know the names of any.
Even you don't know, and you wrote it.
I have to actually download test content, and then I would be able to map it out manually.
Interesting.
Headache.
Yeah, so I've actually used uiautomator because I was using it. I was using the Twitter app, and I was like, do they use a view pager or not? So I opened this up, and I was just like happily spying on what they did. It's really fun in the sense that, you know, when you see some UI that you thought, hey, how did they do that? I mean, there are certain levels that you can't get into if it's a custom view, and then we'll just see, oh, it's a custom view. Oh, but at least you know that if it's a view pager with a frame layout or a coordinator layout and whatnot, you can see the class name at least. So you can kind of get a head start, essentially say, okay, so that's how that part works. So now, since I was talking so much, let me just repeat. So what I did was I went back to the app and I clicked on the button, and then I came back here and I clicked on this, so that now the rocks text view shows. And now, if I click on it, then I can see in the, click on here, then I can see in the resource ID, it says text view rocks. Is it too small? You can see it? So this is how I can then go back to Android Studio and say, hey, okay, this is how I'm going to find the text view. It's quite involved, so I would not recommend doing this unless you absolutely need to. Also, it's very fragile, right? Because it's not your code. Whoever wrote the other app can change whatever, whenever. But it's available if that's something that you want to test. And sometimes like people do that for settings, right? So if you really want to make sure that if somebody turned off this setting and your app is behaving properly, you could potentially go navigate like the system settings menu and go turn it on and off. Or you can set up your app so that you are retrieving the settings through a helper class, and then you use Mockito to mock things out, and then that will be another talk to how to set up tests so that you don't have to depend on system settings. So yeah, that's the Whirlwind tool. More questions?
With Marshmallow coming out, and you wanted to do something, whether it's web or Espresso, and you have to ask for permission, you know, if they have stuff to like tap those specific buttons.
Right, so the question is, what about Marshmallow permissions? Like if I'm running an Espresso test, and depending on whether the user has previously granted permission, it may pop like the dialog or not. Is that kind of a good way of rephrasing your question? I don't think that was exactly what that. Okay.
Can you say more permissions for now?
Yeah, so it's like, can I ignore permission for now? I have not gone down that road because the way I did it for my client, that was exactly what I said. I wrapped the permission asking part of my app into a helper class, which then I mock during tests, so that I will ask this helper class, hey, do you have location permission? And it's like, yeah, sure. So it doesn't bother asking. But then, you know, it depends on what you're actually testing, right? Because if you then turn around and ask the system for a let long, the system will be like, yo, where's your permission? So I also have a helper class that wraps the location asking part, right? I say, hey, what's the location? And it's like 40, -120. So then I don't actually touch the system. So that's how I did it, because then I actually can control where my device physically is. Well, I mean, not control it, you know what I mean, right? Because I mock the latitude, longitude returned by by my helper class, right? And rather than going through there, that's also a way you can do mock location. But I mock all kinds of things. So actually, this is a perfect segue into if you are interested in doing kind of more fancy things. So like this repository, to be completely honest, at the end, after I've done the walkthrough myself, I was like, oh, this is kind of boring. Like it just verifies it's ready. That's not the point of this repository. The point is to show you how to do all the Gradle setup and how do you set up a pure Java thing that can run testing, and then you can set up different flavors and things like that. The tests themselves are kind of boring. So if you want to look at non-boring tests, I have posted a few links of things on my Twitter if you want to take a look. So this is like 3 apps that I think are interesting. One of them I wrote, but the other 2 are written by Google. So if you want to take a look, for example, Topeka is an app that was written to showcase a lot of the material design library, and it actually has pretty good testing. And Google I/O app, like literally, I think this morning or yesterday morning, just pushed the 215 version. It's a completely open source app, and you can go study how they did certain things and then also how they're testing it. So that's great. So the last one is an app that I wrote. I wanted to try the new Nearby API and wrote a little app for it and ended up putting it on the App Store and then deciding that, you know what, this app is better served as a sample. So I just open sourced it. So I can go through it really quickly. So this app has both an Android test and a test folder. So it does both JUnit and Android testing. So for example, in the JUnit folder, it's going to be verify things like, oh, I have this class that's called nearby person. Let me create a letter source with it, and then if I pass these parameters in the constructor, it's going to have these fields, right? So these are the kind of JUnit testing that you'll be doing, like you're verifying the model correctness. But if you go back to the Android testing, so these are actually Espresso tests. So I will go ahead and launch Espresso, and the app, what it does is it will actually log you into Google Plus before it let you do anything. So you're like, how do you test Google Plus login? So again, I have a wrapper class here. It's called Google API Client Bridge. Essentially, it literally just wrap like the onConnect function, connected and things like that, and then I do a pretty fancy mocking because you have to capture arguments and whatnot. Anyway, again, that would be yet another talk. So I just want to kind of give you some pointers. If you kind of get a good sense of how to set it up, but you're not sure then what do you test, I think these are good next steps. And if I can go back here, so these are samples that you may want to compile and play with. And I also gave a talk at DroidCon New York City called Advanced Android Espresso, which go through things like, well, I show you how to write custom matches, and how do you use Dagger and Espresso. That was a very small part of it, so that you can mock out whatever you want to mock out. So you can watch the video, and you can also follow the slides. So the slides are like that. So it's not that interesting if you don't have me talking. So watch the video and look at it at the same time. Bye! Wait, what? Okay. Sorry about screaming. And then finally, I have a course, which is a video recording of explaining how you can set up if you want to use Dagger to do injections, the dependency injections, so that you can use a mock shared preferences in your test. You can go and buy my course. Sorry, I have to pay this time. But I made a coupon code, so if you use the word Denver Droids or lowercase, you'll get a discount. So these things are all on my Twitter, which my Twitter handle is CHIUKI. So maybe, I don't know, Brandon can post the links on the thing later, on the meetup page later. Or, I don't know, I think you can only post a comment. You can't change the description anymore after the fact. Anyway, I'm sure you have ways to find this. So that's all from me. Thank you.